Good evening, Daniel fans. So good to see you tonight. Hope everything's going well and that you're really enjoying this beautiful weather. I keep my fingers crossed because I feel like the other shoe's about to fall, but maybe I'm wrong. And maybe our summer won't be real hot because of this. But at any rate, let's enjoy it while we can. Tonight is a beautiful night. Beautiful night to study Daniel, and to talk about him. And so let's do that. Last time we saw the dream that Nebuchadnezzar had, and how Daniel interpreted the dream, and how he and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego had been elevated into leadership positions within the empire. So we take up now we start now with chapter 3. Now, the Bible doesn't say, we're going to talk about the fiery furnace, as you all know, and you've maybe been looking forward to it, maybe read about it. But the Bible doesn't say when the fiery furnace really occurred. But according to the Septuagint, which is the Latin interpretation of the Bible from which we get all of our books of the Bible, it took place somewhere between 16 and 20 years after the events described in chapter 2. So it wasn't right away after they had been elevated to these positions that the incident with the fiery furnace took place. Chapter 1 then opens up around 605 BC. We talked about that. That was when Daniel and his friends were about 13 or 14 years old, and they were taken into captivity. Then chapter 2 probably took place right after the young Jews had completed a few years of their schooling, and they were probably still about 17, 18 years old, and that's when Daniel gave the interpretation for the dream. So then this leads us to believe that the events in chapter 3, which we're getting ready to go into, occurred around the year of 585 BC. And then when Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were in their early 30s. So you see, they weren't just kids when they were going to be thrown into the furnace. They were older men, or more mature men in their 30s. So it's not, as we look at it, end of the chapter, we see that not much has really changed. Nebuchadnezzar is still king. And he's just as arrogant and demanding and dangerous as he ever was, even though he seemed to have softened up whenever he had the dream and Daniel interpreted it for him. Showed him that the God of Daniel was able to do that. Nebuchadnezzar kind of had a change there, but he's gone back now, and in chapter 3 he's gone back into his old way of leading, the way of doing things. So the so-called wise men, the magicians, the Chaldeans, and the astrologers, are still serving under Daniel and his friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And they, of course, have kind of probably forgot, or intentionally forgot, about that Daniel knew how to interpret Nebuchadnezzar's dream, and they weren't able to. Or maybe they still remember that. But at any rate, there seems to be some jealousy going on there, and hurt pride. They're wanting to get even. They're wanting to get at these Jews. They can't stand. They don't like the idea that here these Jews are brought out from Jerusalem and put into leadership positions. They think that the Jews should be as the slaves, not as leaders. Okay, so let's look at the scripture. Daniel 3:1. So Nebuchadnezzar, the king, made an image of gold. See, he's forgotten all about his allegiance to Daniel's God. And so he's built himself an image of gold. Now, there's some conflict over what that image really was. It doesn't say that it was Nebuchadnezzar's image or the image of one of their gods. It could have been an obelisk like they used for worship in Egypt. It could have been a lot of things. But most people agree that it was a statue of Nebuchadnezzar. So, with that in mind, the height of it was 60 cubits, its width 6 cubits, and he set it up in the plain of Dura, which is just outside of Babylon, a huge plain surrounded by mountains on either sides of it. Huge place, room for thousands of people. Set it up in Dura, the province of Babylon. The statue was about 90 feet, 6 cubits, and 90 feet high. So that's about the height of a 8-story building. So you know it was up there. It was a big building, big statue or big image. But it was only 9 feet wide. So that's kind of squashes it in, makes it. But they were known for making their images not lifelike, so to speak. Okay, something that tall could easily be seen from a great distance away, especially something that if it was placed out in this wide open field in that plain, the plain of Dura, glistening. It was made of gold or covered with gold, and the sun would glisten off of it, and so it would be very easy to spot. But even though it's disproportionate and very tall, very thin, it would be something to see. Now, archaeologists working in that area now have uncovered a large square of bricks, and they discovered that about 6 miles southeast of Babylon. And they believe that this could have been the image or the base for that image that Nebuchadnezzar had built and put out there. And since the base was in the center of this wide plain, the image it would have been very impressive. The height would have been very impressive for an 8-story statue out in the middle of nowhere. So that would have been something to see. Verse 2. At the king Nebuchadnezzar sent word to gather together the satraps, the administrators, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all the officials of the province to come to the dedication of the image of King Nebuchadnezzar that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So, the satraps, the administrators, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, and the judges, the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces gathered together for their dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up, and they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Okay, now the satraps, as they talk about here, S-A-T-R-A-P-S, the satraps, some of your Bibles will say princes, but what they are really was the chief representatives of the king. The administrators were the clerks, the everyday people that kept everything going. The governors, of course, were the civil administrators. They saw to it that their little provinces were taken care of in the way they should be. And the advisors were counselors, and those in government authority. They gave counsel and advice to those that were in the positions of leadership. Treasurers, of course, administrated the funds of the kingdom, and the judges were administrators of the law, and the magistrates passed the judgment in keeping with the law. And the other, as it calls out, the other provincial officials, they were probably the subordinates to the satraps. The list of all the officers probably included everybody that served in any official capacity under Nebuchadnezzar. Now, Nebuchadnezzar was wanting these people all to come and pay him homage. They were to bow down to him, as he will tell them later. When the band starts playing, they were to bow down and play homage to him. Now, there's a lot of discrepancy on what was going on there. There really was he wanting them to pay homage because he had, when Daniel gave him the the original dream, or interpreted the original dream. He was the golden head. The statue had the golden head, and that was the kingdom of Babylon. That was Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom. But he said that it would fall apart. Maybe Nebuchadnezzar didn't want it to fall apart. He wanted it to live forever. So he thought that him being that gold head, he had the authority for people to get people to bow down to him and pay homage to him, and maybe his kingdom would continue on, not fall down, like the dream said. Now there was some other writers got information, and I don't know where that information came from, but they thought maybe there had been some coups in that area, and they're trying to take over the government and kick Nebuchadnezzar out. And so what do we do when you have a coup and it's unfruitful? You kill the people that are involved in it. So those people could have been killed, and the ones that are left were needed to pay homage to the leader. That I'm still here, I'm still loyal to you. So that some said that might have been it. Personally, I believe it was just that Nebuchadnezzar decided he wanted to be a god. His ego got the best of him, and so he had this big image built, and told the people that whenever they hear that music, you get on your face and you worship me. If you don't, there's going to be a penalty. Daniel 3:4 talks about that penalty. It says, "Then a herald cried aloud, 'To you it is commanded.'" You remember you have to yell pretty loud to be heard over all these people. But he says, "To you it is commanded, all you people that are here, O peoples, nations, and languages." That means everybody from every country, from every portion of the empire. They were all brought there. Verse 5, "That in the time you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the harp, the lyre, and the psaltery, in symphony with all kinds of music." Now they didn't just have one of each of these instruments. They had many of them. This was an orchestra of hundreds of musicians. So it would be heard throughout the kingdom. And it says, "You shall fall and worship the gold image that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up." So when you hear that music, get on your face. Verse 6, "And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast immediately into the midst of a burning fiery furnace." Now they had a fiery furnace set up just for that purpose, just to punish those who would not pay homage to Nebuchadnezzar. A huge furnace in somewhere in the ground with these big bellows that you pump to pump up the furnace and get it fire going and going really hot. Okay. The Bible doesn't say, though, now at this point where Daniel was. It doesn't say anything about Daniel. It doesn't say whether he was present there at this worship service, and that's what it was, a worship service. They were worshiping Nebuchadnezzar. It doesn't say whether or not Daniel was there. Now, many experts hold a position that he wasn't there. And well, I'm not an expert, but I have to agree with them, because I think if Daniel had been there, he would have refused to bow down, and therefore he would have been thrown into the fiery furnace. And since there's no record of that happening, it just stands to reason that he must have been gone away out of the province, doing business for the king, probably. Whatever it was, we just don't believe it was there. Well, let's talk a little bit about this situation in Babylon. Let's go back to the book of Genesis. If you remember the book of Genesis, there was a flood. Noah and his family were rescued. They were saved. They went into the ark, and later on they came out on dry land. After they came off of the ark, then they had to replenish the earth or reproduce, and so they did. And one of those that Noah reproduced was a great grandson called Nimrod. We've talked about Nimrod before, but Nimrod, he's quite a guy. He was the great grandson of Noah, and he lived after the flood. and he was what they'd called a really lawless person. He was evil, just downright evil. Just work for Satan, not for God. He tried to establish a world religion and a world government free from God, free from our God. He was credited with founding several cities. Among one of them was Babylon, of course. Wonder why Babylon was so evil. He was one of the ones he was the one that established that town, and he was the head of the first anti-God civilization. Now, this was a civilization that was completely void of God altogether. They wouldn't even recognize him. It has to be an evil place when it's like that. I went to visit my daughter and her husband when they were teaching school in Saudi Arabia. And we landed the plane on Riyadh, and I stepped off the plane, and it was almost like I just stepped into something evil. You could just feel it. And I realized I was in a country where Christianity was outlawed. Christianity was completely illegal. You couldn't even meet with another person to study the Bible. That was against the law. You weren't even allowed to have Bibles according to their purpose. So it was just illegal. The compound where my daughter and her husband lived was all Americans and teachers, and they would get together on a particular evening and have their little Bible studies. But if they'd gotten caught doing that, they would have been kicked out of the country. So being in a place where Christianity is illegal is just a kind of a feeling like it would have been if it would have been in Babylon. Only Babylon wasn't just Christianity that was illegal; it was no God at all. That was the way Nimrod wanted it. But of course, that civilization failed, and so right on his close on his heels was old Nebuchadnezzar, and Nebuchadnezzar tried the same thing. He tried to establish a one world government, a one world religion, and have these people to bow down to him and do this. But his civilization fell apart. So we look at and then Babylon is sometimes called the city of Satan. You wonder why? No, that's the reason why. And it's interesting that Nimrod tried to establish this one world religion and one world government there, and he failed. And Nebuchadnezzar followed right after him, and he tried to do the same thing, and he failed. Well, one day, maybe not too distant future, the Antichrist will come, and he will do the same thing. He will establish a one-world religion and one-world government, void of our God, void of Jesus Christ. But I'm here to tell you, there's good news, and it's great news. It just really excites me, is that after that, Jesus will come back. He'll return for his second coming. He'll come out with his armies, and he'll defeat the Antichrist and throw him into the lake of fire. And he won't be walking around in there with another man. He'll be dead. That fire will take care of him. Okay. So that's exciting when I just get excited when I think about Jesus coming back. I get excited when I think about being raptured and not having to be here through that tribulation time and suffer all the things that they're going to have to suffer. But it doesn't mean we won't suffer, and it doesn't mean that if we're left, we won't have some of the tribulation, because there's Christians today in the world that are suffering tribulation. They're having to stand up and say, "I believe in Jesus Christ," and when they say that and they denounce their other gods, their head lopped off, or they're killed, or they're punished in some way. So it's not just going to be during that great tribulation that this is going to happen. And some of us could be having to be there as part of it, go through part of it. Now, some of the Chaldeans, the astrologers, were acting kind of as spies at this event. And I look at them, I think, of little rats. You see in the cartoons, remember they used to have little rats with their sharp, pointy noses and their wide whiskers running around and getting into everything. Well, it's kind of like I feel like these Chaldeans were. They were little rats that were trying to get to the Jews. See, they didn't believe that these Hebrew children, these Jews, should be able to come, be taken captive, trained, and put into leadership capacities, especially over them. And this is what has happened, especially to these four, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, and Daniel. They were put into supervisory, high up in the structure, the leadership structure of Babylon. And these Chaldeans were subordinate to them, and they didn't like that because, see, these were Jews. Jews were supposed to be slaves. They're not supposed to be supervisors. But Nebuchadnezzar nevertheless put them in because he knew they were the smartest ones to do the job. So what happened? They forgot that Daniel, one of these Jewish kids that they didn't like, Daniel himself, about 15, 16 years earlier, had saved their lives because his God had given him the interpretation of Nebuchadnezzar's dream, which he gave and saved all of these so-called magicians, wise men, whatever they had been. See? Their lives had been spared, but they seemed to have forgotten that and put that all that went out the window when their jealousy started firing up. Okay, let's move on. Daniel 3:8. Therefore, at that time, certain Chaldeans, that's these little rats, came forward and accused the Jews. They accused them. They're going to get them. They want to get them in trouble. They want to get rid of them. They spoke and said, "Can you hear this? O King Nebuchadnezzar, live forever." Like they meant it. You, O King, have made a decree that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, flute, harp, lyre, and psaltery in symphony with all kinds of music shall fall down and worship the gold image. Now, did they have to remind Nebuchadnezzar that he'd made this decree? Of course not. Nebuchadnezzar knew that he made the decree. He knew that he had set that out. He knew that he had required all the people to come and bow down. It's not new. So what they were doing was trying to put him on the spot, with these the Hebrews. So, verse 12, there are certain Jews whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. See, he named them. These men, O king, have not paid due regard to you. They do not serve your God or worship the gold image which you have set up. So see, they put Nebuchadnezzar on the spot. They said, now you made this decree. Now you've got these guys, and he kind of liked these Hebrews. He liked these guys. Nebuchadnezzar really didn't want to do anything bad to them, but he was kind of caught in here between a rock and a hard place, and these guys were pointing it out to him. So what happens is, in verse 13, Nebuchadnezzar, in rage and fury, and I'm not sure he was whether his rage and fury was towards the Hebrew kids, or I keep calling them kids, they're in their 30s, who these Hebrews, or at these guys that were trying to, the little rats that were trying to get him, cause trouble and stir things up. But at any rate, he was mad. And so he commanded, bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So they brought these men before the king. Now, verse 14, Nebuchadnezzar spoke, saying then, Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the gold image which I have set up? Now, he was trying to give them a second chance. Like I said, I think he kind of liked them. He's trying to give them a second chance. You didn't do it the first time, but maybe you'll do it the second. Maybe you didn't understand. Maybe this is what he's thinking. So verse 14, Nebuchadnezzar spoke, saying to them, Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve the gods or worship the gold image which I have set up? Now, if you are ready at the time you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the harp, the lyre, and the psaltery, in symphony with all kinds of music, and you fall down and worship the image which I have made, good. So if you do it, now I'm going to give you another chance, and when you hear all those instruments playing, if you bow down, that'll be good. But if you don't worship, you shall be cast immediately into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. And who is the God who will deliver you from my hands? See, he's getting, Nebuchadnezzar's a little bit self-elated. He's kind of built himself up. He's got an ego that's bigger than most mountains, okay? And when he said this, who is the God who will deliver you from my hands? Who is the God that's going to do this? It says he's quite conscientious or quite conscious of the demonstration of the superiority of God of the Hebrews. The God of the Hebrews, he demonstrated the fact that he was superior to all the other gods when he interpreted the dream in chapter 2 for Daniel. He demonstrated the fact that he was superior to all these other gods. But that doesn't seem to sit well with Nebuchadnezzar, because he can't bring himself to believe that God, the God of the Jews, the God who had helped him interpret the dream, he couldn't believe that God would be able, be strong enough, have the power to in these circumstances to deliver these three men from his hand. He just didn't think that that their God would be strong enough and be able to do that. Just wasn't. Well, see, the fact that Nebuchadnezzar feels supreme in his power and doesn't expect any God to be able to interfere. He thinks he is the strongest God of around. I mean, his God is. There's no other God that's strong enough to overcome what Nebuchadnezzar says. Now, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered him. He said, "Who's God?" Said, "And who is the God who will deliver you from my hands?" And so they're going to tell him. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered him, saying to the king, "O Nebuchadnezzar." Now they didn't say, "O king, live forever." They just said, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter." We don't have to answer you. Why should we answer to you? You already know the God of our God. You know the power of our God. And you know what he can do. In verse 17, if that is the case, our God whom we serve, you got that? Our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us from your hand, O king. See, these three showed absolute confidence in God. Absolute confidence. They had no doubt that God was there and God was going to take care of them. They stated that their God was greater than Nebuchadnezzar and was able to deliver them from Nebuchadnezzar's judgment, and he would do it in a display of his superior power. These words, the God we serve, shows that they recognized God's authority, that God's authority was greater than the authority claimed by Nebuchadnezzar. Nothing was greater than the Hebrews' God. Though they were employed by Nebuchadnezzar. Now, they worked for Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar was their boss, right? He paid their salaries. He took care of them. But they didn't serve him. They served Yahweh. They served their God, Yahweh. Yeah. And this is what I like. Verse 17. If that is the case, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from a burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us from your hand, O king. And here it is, verse 18. But if not, let it be known to you, O king, that we do not serve your gods. See, we believe God's going to take us out of the fiery furnace. But if he doesn't, we still serve that God. Even if he doesn't take us out, he'll still take care of us in another way. Even if we die, we go to be with him. So what power does Nebuchadnezzar have over them? Can you imagine? Can you imagine these guys? The only one out of thousands and thousands of people that didn't bow. And then, Nebuchadnezzar takes them up and he said, I'm going to give you another chance. Denounce your God and bow down to me and to my God. And you'll be saved from the fiery furnace. And these guys stood up and said, no way. We will never bow down to your God. We will only bow down to Yahweh, our God. We'll never bow down to your God. And furthermore, we know that our God is greater than yours, and he will take care of us. He'll save us. And if he doesn't, so what? He'll still take care of us regardless of what happens. Now, someday, as we talked before, someday there might come a day when we have to make that kind of a decision ourselves. It may be possible that we have to stand up and say, I believe in Jesus Christ as my Lord, and I will not denounce him. I will only pay homage to him. And then we could have our heads lopped off, or killed in some other way, or punished in some other way. Maybe not that drastic, and maybe a subtle thing like losing our job because we can't work because we believe in Jesus. Or we can't get medical care because we believe in Jesus. Could be a lot of things, but we need to think about that and prepare for it. And here's our example right here. God tells us right here in his word how to do it, to stand fast. But if not, let it be known to you, O king, that we do not serve your gods, nor will we worship the gold image which you have set up. Verse 19. Then Nebuchadnezzar was full of fury. Now he's really mad. He's mad at these guys now. And the expression on his face changed towards. That shows that his anger now is directed at them. It's Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And he spoke and commanded that they heat the furnace 7 times more than it was usually heated. Pump those big old bellows and fill that oxygen in there. Get that heat going strong and those flames lapping out of there. And then he commanded certain mighty men of valor. Now that's the strongest men in his army. The special ops guys in his army. The strongest and most burly guys, big old guys. Anyhow, the biggest hero, men of valor, who were in his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and cast them into the burning fiery furnace. Then these men were bound in their coats and their trousers, their turbans and their other garments, and were cast into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. They put their work uniform on, or these people in those days they dressed for their office. They wore certain turbans, they wore certain clothes, and they dressed them up the way they were in their everyday clothes or their uniform. Then they bound them tight. Bound them. It says I would say they probably put ropes all around them, and then they threw them into the furnace. Threw them into the fiery furnace. But that fire was so hot. Verse 22, therefore, because the king's command was urgent and the furnace exceedingly hot, the flame of the fire, those big old flames lapping out of that furnace when they opened the door, the fire killed those men, those big old special ops guys, killed those men who took Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these three men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell down, bound, still tied up, into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Now, they fell down into the fiery furnace. Then something happened. Nebuchadnezzar was astonished. He was astonished. He was apparently sitting somewhere where he could watch into the furnace. And what he saw there astonished him, is the word. And he rose in haste and spoke, saying to his counselors, did not we cast 3 men bound into the midst of the fire? Didn't we throw 3 guys in there? And they answered and said to the king, true, O king, yeah, there was 3 men that we threw in there. He says, verse 25, he says, look, he answered, I see 4 men loose walking in the midst of the fire, and they're not hurt, and the form of the 4th is like the Son of God. The Son of God. Who's that? Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ was in that furnace, and he was walking with those guys, and he was protecting them every step of the way. He protected them. Isaiah 43:2 says, you will walk through the fire, and you will not be burned. Kind of a prediction of this, maybe. Verse 26 says, then Nebuchadnezzar went near the mouth of the burning fiery furnace, and he spoke, saying, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God. Servants of the Most High God. Now he's getting it now. Come out and come here. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came from the midst of the fire. In verse 27, and the satraps, the administrators, the governors, the king's counselors. Now these were all these thousands of people that had come from all over the country to pay homage to Nebuchadnezzar. Now, what do they see? They saw these men on whose bodies the fire had no power. The hair of their head was not singed, nor their garments affected, and the smell of fire was not on them. There was not a hair on their head that even got singed, or their eyebrows, or anything else. Their clothes were still intact. They were not burned. And they didn't even smell like the fire. It's like they hadn't even been there. That's how protected they were at Jesus Christ. How you can walk through the flames and not be burned. 28. Nebuchadnezzar spoke. He got something to say now. He spoke. It's getting through to him. Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who sent his angels and delivered his servant who trusted in him. Now, he thought it was an angel. I think it was Jesus. And they have frustrated the king's word. The king's word was that they were to be destroyed, and they frustrated the king's word and not yielded their bodies, that they should not serve nor worship any god except their own God. See, They frustrated the King Nebuchadnezzar by saying, we won't serve any God except our God. Verse 29, therefore I make a decree. Now he's making a decree. He's done this many times before. He's making another one. I make a decree that any people, nation, or language which speaks anything amiss against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Lost the page here. Shall be cut in pieces. And remember we talked about that, how they don't cut them with a axe or sword. They tie them to the tree, and the tree splits them into 4 pieces. They shall be cut to pieces, and their houses shall be made an ash heap, just like it said in there before, because there is no other God who can deliver like this. He's admitted it. There is no other God that can deliver like this. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. After all of that, the king promoted them. He didn't throw them into the fiery furnace like these little rats wanted them. He threw them in the fiery furnace, but when he brought them out, they weren't burned, and they got promoted. So now they're even higher than what they were before. So how do you think these little guys feel? Well, see, what comes around goes around. What goes around comes around. However you want to say it. But we know for sure that the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego was the superior God. He was the greatest God. He was the one that was able to deliver, and he was able to show his power to this pagan king. And now he is reaching out to thousands and thousands of people throughout the kingdom through the act of this king. Well, there's more to it. There's another dream coming up in the next chapter, and you'll find it more interesting too. But that's all for tonight. We're going to stop there, and we'll take up in chapter 3 or chapter 4. Yeah, we'll take up in chapter 4 next time. Until then, I just hope that you have a wonderful, wonderful time. Enjoy this beautiful weather out there. It is so wonderful right now. Don't know how long it'll last, but it's there, and it's great. So enjoy the weather, and may the good Lord bless you, keep you. May his face shine upon you, and may he give you peace, and may he grant you the desires of your heart. And just remember, guys, I love you very, very much. I hope to see you Sunday in church. But until next time, keep on smiling.